What if I told you the child you've seen in photographs, in press releases, in staged birthday portraits may not exist? No, not in the way we're told. Not born from the body we were shown. Not the product of a royal bloodline, nor the result of a medical miracle, nor even a private surrogate agreement. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But rather, manufactured. Now pause for a second. That's not a metaphor. We're talking wires. Silicone. Vents beneath synthetic skin. A doll. And not just any doll. One specifically engineered to fool even the most scrutinizing lens. To pass as living, breathing, even. Designed to be held under soft lighting, wrapped in royal blankets, and presented to the world as Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor. But then, what does that make the people who did it? Why did MI5 and MI6, the United Kingdom's most secretive, most elite intelligence services, just hold a joint press conference about a toddler? And what does this say about the lengths power will go to when truth becomes inconvenient? Because something broke this week. A wall cracked. A few whispers got louder than intended. And the room, this curated room of royalty, global influence, streaming platforms, and carefully lit nurseries, suddenly went cold. There's no going back from what was said at that podium. And yet, curiously, the British press is whispering, not reporting. American outlets? Silent. Influencers? Unsure. Even the Sussexes themselves? Not a word. Just a reposted quote about protecting peace, and a conveniently timed photo of Meghan at a private garden brunch. No children in sight. So, where's Lilibet? And more importantly, what is Lilibet? Because right now, behind locked doors and inside cold data centers, there are files being opened, emails being scrubbed, and digital baby images being reverse-engineered frame by frame, pixel by pixel. And there's a name that keeps coming up again and again. Darrell. If you've never heard of a Darrell Doll, you're not alone. Most haven't. But within trauma recovery circles, among certain controversial tech developers, and within the archived pages of some very expensive private military contracts, the name has quietly existed for years. A Darrell Doll isn't a toy. It's not a therapy puppet. It's a hyper-realistic infant substitute. Lifelike down to heat sensors, fake tear ducts, breath-mimicking chest expansion, and pre-programmed eye motion. They are, in every sense, designed to be indistinguishable from a living child from a distance. And one of these dolls, according to intelligence chatter, was purchased through an encrypted payment trail by an unnamed foundation headquartered in Los Angeles. The trail leads through two cutouts, one in Santa Barbara and another through a now-dissolved limited partnership. The signature? MRES. Let me ask you this. Why would a high-profile former royal, one who has built a brand on motherhood, on legacy, on feminist identity, need to possess such a thing? Why would a doll like this ever need to be photographed in the same swaddle wrap used by Diana? And why now, after years of scrutiny, silence, and stage control, would MI6 suddenly risk the monarchy's image by going public? Unless the doll isn't the story. Unless the doll is just the entry point. And what we're looking at is something much bigger. A deception so quietly complex, so layered in public trust, private grief, and institutional betrayal, that exposing it was the only path left. Still, it's worth asking, why didn't they speak sooner? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. This wasn't an overnight investigation. This wasn't a spontaneous press conference. It wasn't prompted by a new tip-off or a recent scandal. The intelligence community had been watching, waiting. For 2 years, monitoring international travel, cross-referencing timestamps, running facial recognition on child imagery released by the Sussex PR team. And what they found wasn't just inconsistencies. It wasn't just a questionable birth certificate or a nurse who never existed or missing hospital logs. It was a pattern that suggested the child, Lilibet Diana, was being substituted. At first, the theory was benign. A protective decoy, maybe. Meghan and Harry had been through enough. Who could blame them for keeping the real child private? But then, deeper dives uncovered something far more chilling. The substitutes weren't aging. They weren't growing. The Lilibet, shown in year 1, matched facial symmetry, lip tension, and even blinking intervals with the Lilibet, shown a year later. Statistically impossible, unless it was a recycled image. Unless it was a doll. And then came the photo that changed everything. A soft focus shot released to a carefully selected media partner, showing Meghan holding her daughter on a blanket in filtered light with a carefully framed Sussex-branded water bottle just out of focus. At first glance, perfect. But a single analyst, working out of a satellite division within the GCHQ, noticed something wrong with the shadow. Specifically, that there wasn't one. Not in the way a real child would cast under diffused afternoon sun. That image was escalated. And from there, a cascading internal audit revealed a chilling possibility. That none of the images released to the public had passed through conventional media servers. They were routed, each time, through a now-defunct digital marketing agency based in Toronto, one tied to a woman who once served as Meghan's private brand strategist during her Suits days. Coincidence? Let's not pretend there are many of those left. Now, we're not here to speculate without evidence. You'll see for yourself in the chapters that follow. Each thread unraveled, slowly, painfully. Each witness carefully shielded. Each file examined. Each silence documented. But before we go any further, we need to understand what's at stake. Because this isn't about whether Meghan lied. It's about what happens when institutions that thrive on image, monarchies, governments, streaming giants, collide with the digital tools designed to simulate reality. It's about the breakdown of trust, the commodification of birth, the performative motherhood that gets monetized into documentaries, memoirs, brand deals, and wellness campaigns. And it's about a child, or the image of one. Either way, we've been watching. We've been sold something. And now, that illusion is unraveling in real time. So here's the plan. Over the next hour, we're going to unpack the MI5/MI6 press conference that sent shockwaves through Westminster. We'll trace the strange history of the Darrell Doll. Who designed it, and why it ended up in a Malibu safe house. We'll zoom in on that one freeze frame from the Netflix series, the moment the infant's wrist folds just slightly too mechanically. And we'll hear from people who tried to sound the alarm months ago and were shut down. You'll hear from royal insiders, digital forensic experts, psychological analysts, and a former special operations logistics officer who claims he was paid to fly a non-human package to Santa Barbara in June 2021. And through it all, one question will remain at the center. Where is Lilibet Diana? Does she even exist? And if she does, why hasn't she cried in public? Why hasn't she smiled in motion? Why does no one, recall ever hearing her voice? Let that settle, because everything else hinges on that absence. And as we begin, consider this. When a lie is crafted so perfectly, it becomes indistinguishable from love. How do you convince the world it was a lie? You don't. You show them the doll. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Why hold a press conference at all? That was my first question when the alert came in, code flagged in real time, sent through the encrypted feed most journalists forget still exists. A joint appearance. MI5 and MI6. That alone should have told us something was wrong. Deeply wrong. These are agencies that operate in silence by design. Not even during the Skripal poisoning, not after London Bridge, not when royals were targets of foreign espionage did they ever step into the media light together. And yet, here they were. Suited. Stoic. Controlled. No flags. No podium seal. No glossy emblem of state. Just two men, identical postures, flanked by security and a single laminated statement. And silence. Until the first words were read. Public trust is the currency of our survival. When that trust is manipulated for personal gain, it becomes a matter of national interest. No names. No specifics. Just that line, and the room shifted. Was it about government disinformation? Foreign agents? No. Too targeted. Too intentional. But then came the phrase that didn't belong, at least not in intelligence discourse. Artificial proxies used in the representation of human minors. The words hung there. It didn't register for a second. We all blinked. What does that even mean? Artificial proxies? Used where? A journalist from the Times raised his hand, visibly shaken. Are you referring to a synthetic child? The man from MI6, his name redacted on the transcript, paused. A long pause, like he was choosing whether to say something irreversible. Then, yes, specifically one presented as an heir. It was the word heir that did it. Not child, not minor, heir. And just like that, Every royal correspondent in the room sat forward, and every diplomatic advisor on the secure stream went pale. They weren't just talking about fraud. They were talking about the crown. And that meant Meghan. Now, to be clear, no names were used, not in the official release, not in the broadcast copy. But the timing, the implications, the breadcrumbs, none of it was accidental. We had been primed for this moment. A week prior, unmarked personnel had visited multiple former royal properties. Frogmore, Nottingham Cottage, even a secondary flat in Kensington once used by staff. No reason given. Quiet security sweeps. Unusual interest in ventilation systems and storage units. At first, it seemed like standard cleanup. Maybe Charles was shifting documents. Maybe and had triggered a review. But those inspections weren't carried out by palace staff. They were executed by specialists from Thames House. Counterintelligence. And now we knew why. The press conference shifted gears. The spokesperson from MI5, gray hair, firm tone, read from a short classified file declassification notice. It detailed findings from a long-term analysis of public imagery, international travel logs, and encrypted communications believed to relate to the synthetic replication of minor identifiers. That's intelligence speak for, we tracked a fake baby. But that's not what made the oxygen leave the room. It was the last sentence before they ended the briefing. We have reason to believe the object known as Lilibet Diana is not biologically connected to the subject presumed to be her mother. Just like that. Not a baby. An object. Not Meghan Markle. The subject presumed to be her mother. That distancing wasn't accidental. It was surgical. Deliberate. It stripped away identity. Neutralized the narrative. And it opened the door for plausible deniability from the monarchy, should they choose to cut her loose. Think about that. MI5 and MI6 just described a royal child in terms used for counterfeits. No rebuttal. No, this is developing. Just fact. And still, most major outlets said nothing. CNN cut away before the quote aired. BBC ran the transcript, but buried it in an article titled "Security Briefing Addresses Public Disinformation Threats." And Meghan? Not a word. Not a tweet. Not a quote. Not a single staged photo. It was as if silence had become the only remaining defense. But not everyone stayed quiet. In the back of the room, someone coughed. A woman, tall, early 40s, dark jacket, raised her hand. Foreign press badge. Belgian, I think. She didn't wait to be called on. Is the agency prepared to confirm the use of Darrell Model 3B in this operation? The room stopped. She had said it. The name. Darrell. The spokesperson didn't blink. He didn't nod. But there was something, a flicker, maybe, in the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smirk. Not quite surprise. And then came his reply, carefully worded, each syllable placed like a chess piece. We are aware of the existence of that model, and we are no longer convinced it is being used exclusively for therapeutic purposes. That was it. That was the tell. In intelligence language, that's as close as you get to confirmation. And every story that had lived in shadow, every whispered rumor, leaked photo, anonymous message board post, all of it suddenly felt possible. Because the Darrell Model 3B isn't folklore. It exists. Patented. Developed under private contract for a trauma recovery project linked to high-risk grief cases. Originally designed to help bereaved mothers reintegrate after loss by holding an identical synthetic version of their deceased child. Yes, that's real. But over time, the use cases expanded. Darrell Labs, which was acquired and disbanded quietly in 2019, had reportedly sold limited units to high-profile clientele for private ceremonial use. In other words, people who needed to be seen holding a child, but didn't have one to hold. Think about that. Think about the doors that opens. It's no longer just about grief. It's about optics, control, image, marketing. You've seen those carefully curated photos. Harry smiling, Lilibet in his lap, Meghan in that almost too soft focus angle, arm wrapped around a child who never seems to move. Now go back and look again. Where's the motion? Where's the crying baby moment? The candid laughter? The child reaching for a flower, pulling mom's hair, fidgeting with jewelry? There's none. There's stillness. Perfectly staged. Perfectly lit. But lifeless. A Belgian outlet later confirmed that the journalist who asked the Darrell question was tipped off 2 days earlier, by someone inside the European Cyber Defense Center. Someone who had reviewed a brief that included metadata anomalies tied to infant photography routed through a Santa Barbara domain. And again, that phrase, synthetic replication. The kind of phrase that doesn't belong in a file about children, unless the children aren't real. Now, you might ask, what was the goal of this press conference? Surely MI5 and MI6 don't do PR. And you'd be right. But when something has escalated beyond closed-room containment, when public institutions risk long-term reputational collapse, the only strategy left is fracture the narrative. Expose just enough. Let the public piece together the rest. And by naming the doll without naming the mother, by confirming the deception without confirming the actor, they forced a question into the public psyche without ever answering it. If Lilibet isn't Meghan's daughter, then whose is she? And that question, once released, doesn't go away. It can't be unsaid, can't be untyped, can't be unsearched. It will live in the corners of the internet, in family group chats, in whispered conversations between royal advisors and corporate media lawyers.